Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on creating Call of Cthulhu scenarios throughout the decades with the RPG Reanimators. I'm Lex.
I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
And I'm Nathan.
And on our podcast, we usually focus on reanimating published scenarios and then changing some details, like bringing classic Call of Cthulhu scenarios to a modern day. We should cover that for a panel sometime, I feel like, right?
No.
Oh, it's been there, done
Not
that.
interested.
Very last year.
Okay. However, we noticed that there aren't very many scenarios in the decades between the 1920s and 30s that Chaosium typically publishes for, and what we'll call the modern day, from like 2010 onwards. So today's panel is designed to try and help address that. The way this will work is that each of us will introduce a decade after the 1930s and then give a few notes to characterize it, including some noteworthy historical events, technological advances, pop culture touchstones, and general vibes that could have some mythos horror inspiration for future scenario writing. We'll also note in advance that our perspectives are primarily going to be US-based and from a millennial setting, because that's who we are. Since this is a lot of ground to cover in just 50-ish minutes, we're going to need to keep things moving pretty quickly and won't have time to discuss everything noteworthy that's happened within these decades, and we'll hopefully have a limited time for Q&A at the end of the panel. However, as you may have noticed, we are recording this to publish on our podcast later. So, with all of that said, let's take a jump to the left, and then a step to the right, and then time more back to the 1940s.
Right, the 1940s, huge, obvious thing is World War II. The war just absolutely dominates this period of time, this decade, and there are a lot of good, things that you can experiment with the war. It just doesn't have to be the war front, right? The war touches everything. The war front. You can look into the home front, right? That's an interesting angle where you have the stuff that's not on the battlefield. You have cults operating at home and using this war. Everyone's focused on that. Cults can work maliciously. And
they can use the government cheese that they put out in the boxes.
Right. And then we can also talk about recovering from the war, because the war ended after half the decade. So what's the homecoming look like? How does it affect everyone? Maybe you can have a scenario where the soldiers have been haunted from the mythos. Maybe we can have that follow them home, right?
To me, though, I am genuinely surprised that there aren't more World War II focused scenarios, because this is prime time mythos, Nazi punching, Hellboy action. Like, I always think Mike Mignola's Hellboy and all the things in there. An important topic to address in this, though, is if you're going to have some sort of a mythos horror element within this World War II-ish setting, it is of paramount importance to be sure you are not making any excuses for the things that were done. Nazis were going to Nazi and be evil assholes no matter what, but the mythos can be in there to pour some proverbial gasoline on the fire and then up the horror for that kind of setting in there.
Yeah, and Hitler was really into the occult at that time too, so it's not even that much of
it's not a leap.
Stretch. Yeah.
Right, it's pretty reasonable that any despot will go to any lengths necessary to try to cling to power. So there's a lot of room in there, especially in the tail end of it, just for desperate last-ditch efforts that always go awry. I think that there's a lot of room for especially pulp, again, Hellboy-ish Nazi punching scenarios in there.
Yeah, and there's for scenario inspiration, if you haven't ever seen the movie Overlord, it's a fun, allies dropped into Europe and Nazis are kind of experimenting, creating this mutant super soldier-esque type thing. Yeah, it's fun inspiration and not like a D movie quality. It's good. It's fun.
Right. So what else happens in the 1940s? Well, after the war ended, the Cold War rumblings of that began. So you have this fear of communism. The USSR detonates a nuclear bomb towards the end of the year in 1949. You also have Roswell, right? So that happens in 1947. So that's a lot of fodder for our friends from Yugoth, right?
Or a convenient cover for a lot of scenarios where there are a lot of fears of conspiracy and, foreign spies, Russian satellites. Well, maybe not quite yet, but there's lots of things in there that you can use to set dress over potential mythos elements where the news is wanting to keep people calm and say, no, this is fine. We got it all under control. Do not look at the weird glowy thing behind me. Everything's fine here.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Roswell. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, if you're not a Delta Green player, that's totally fine. Like, you can certainly turn that into, like, you know, government investigators via the Call of Cthulhu angle and still get an interesting story out of it. Who discovered Roswell? What really happened there?
Yeah.
Life was just so much different in the 1940s. There wasn't a lot of drugs. People were very trusting. They didn't lock their doors back then. They left their car keys in their cars. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the Cold War is one we're going to be hitting a lot throughout the decades, because it goes to the 90s, I think, which is my section to report. I should know this exactly, but it doesn't matter.
I'm pretty sure.
But it's a good, you could do a campaign throughout the Cold War, and that would be kind of an interesting...
Because there is the Cold War Cthulhu supplement, right?
There is,
I think
yeah.
Chaosium
Yes.
bought it from Cubicle 7, but
Yeah.
my memory's getting hazy here.
I think this is the perfect time to just go into 1950s, where we continue this paranoia, the Red Scare. Sputnik launches in 1957, so you get a lot of space-themed scenarios that you could, you know, look into. You could talk about nuclear power. You could talk about how there was the expansion of suburbs, right? Like real nuclear family stuff, where you have the white picket fences.
Right. Like, yeah, whenever I think of 50s, I think of that nifty 50s, Leave It to Beaver, Stepford Wives. Everyone is so perfect and happy and loving it, living another free, beautiful day in America, with a little tremble in the back of their voice. That I feel that there is such a pressure to seem and appear perfect. And there is a lot of room for all sorts of weird things could be going on behind the doors. And it's, I think, a great opportunity for, especially if you wanted to have something like ghouls pretending to be regular neighbors. And the investigators may be noticing that, like, people are going missing in the neighborhood, but they try to investigate, but that's weird. And, you know, you're looking into your neighbor's yards, that sounds like something a communist would do. And so building a lot of paranoia, not only from an actual, like, monster entity, but social paranoia in terms of they need to try and conform or else face some kind of dubious consequence in that.
I like to think, yeah, with touching on the suburban America, everything is beautiful, but not really, not quite. The idea of kind of like Innsmithy, like you're living in this beautiful, perfect town and your neighbors move in next door and they look a little different. You know, they don't necessarily like know the customs quite right. It's very like, greeting fellow Americans. How are you? Isn't this a wonderful day in the beautiful United States kind of situation? And like that, the seeds of paranoia that already exist in the 50s. I like the idea of playing off of that a lot.
And there's that fear of like a nuclear fallout. You have people who are building bomb shelters in the back of their backyards. So I'd love to see a scenario with like that just takes place in a bomb shelter. That would be cool. Chaosium actually has the Atomic Age Cthulhu supplemental book, and that's a fantastic book for the 1950s. There's a lot of technological advancements. TVs become available to the masses, which is, I think there's a scenario in Atomic Age Cthulhu where it's like, you know, there's the TikTok man who's seeping its way into this new technology.
Yeah, something that you're going to hear a few times in this that we've noticed as kind of a trend in people are always really excited about these new advances in technology. Well, except for recently. But generally, people have been really excited at all the promise and opportunity at these new advances in technology. But with that excitement, there's always this deep-rooted trepidation and fear that something is new, it's uncertain. I recall there was an interview where Alfred Hitchcock refused to film in color for the longest time because it made the actors look like they were made out of baloney. And that transition to color TV could have a color out of space potential thing where people are really unnerved that like the TV, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look natural. People can't look away from it. And that any time that there's some kind of technological jump, I think that there is a lot of room to play off of some sort of fear that the social public would have had at that time. I have a bias towards technology-based scenarios, though.
Honestly, a lunch meat man in the 50s would be really creepy. I like the idea
Hello,
of just
fellow
a
Americans. My name is Oscar Mayer. Nice to meet you.
It's like, you guys spell spam in here?
Shoggoth Lord.
I think going back to one thing that you had said, Alex, you know, we've talked before about the strength of like a single location scenario, especially for new players, and like a single location scenario that takes place in a bomb shelter would be really interesting. I like that idea.
That could be great, or you can play on a paranoia. I keep going to that suburbs thing where you have a map for one house, and technically they go to the neighborhood, but every house is exactly the same. More than that, every house is the same as they left it. Almost like a coherence kind of situation where they go into the street, any new house they go into, they've just left, or some kind of a weird time loopy thing like that.
And then, of course, the Stepford Wives themselves just lend to an interesting scenario of like programming people to be exactly what you want them to be to fit this image.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that there's a lot of horror in, we talked about McCarthyism and that communist Red Scare and reporting neighbors for being communist spies, and they would be sent to a re-education camp. Boy, howdy, slap a shoggoth or something in there that can try and mentally shatter people so that the government can build them back up. A favorite trope of mine is humans using unnatural things to meet some mundane end and not fully understanding what they're grappling with. And so it leads to some negative outcome. So yeah, having especially like rigid political administrations that are using some kind of mythos element to further their own goals, I think there's rife opportunity for that within the 60s or 50s and 60s.
It's very Manchurian Candidate too, with that, like having code words that can set somebody off. Because I mean, a lot of the people in the 50s, they lived through the 40s, so there's probably a little bit of violence maybe left over from a
You
war.
think?
I don't know.
No,
Maybe.
I don't think they
little
had
treat.
PTSD back then.
No,
that
that
was the
doesn't sound
millennials
right.
invented it with our avocado toast.
They got rid of shell shock and it was solved.
All right. Well, I think someone mentioned the 60s, so I guess we can swing on over to the 60s. One of my favorite eras. Now, so a lot of stuff's going on in the 60s as well. We have the Vietnam War. We have the moon landing. I'm going to touch on the moon landings in the 70s because that's where we had most of the moon landings anyway. So we're going to circle back to that. But of course, the Vietnam War and of course the first war to really be fully televised. There's some interesting elements that you can play with there, both from the home front and on the war front as well. Again, with Lex's point of making sure you're not excusing people's real life, horrible atrocities for, it was all the myth. It was Nyarlathotep making everyone do it the whole time.
No.
Don't do that. No, boo. Also, we have the rise of like hippies, communes, cults. Like, I mean, the Manson murders themselves are like horrifically cultish in its own way. That's something you could certainly draw inspiration from. I like the idea with Woodstock. Oh, I see.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I like the idea with Woodstock that you have this like music festival. All these people come together, hundreds of people. They're all on drugs, as they do. And then the King in Yellow just makes a little less
welcome
sweet
to
little
the new
appearance.
stage, the Tattered Players opening for Jimi Hendrix, and then chaos ensues. People can't tell what's part of their acid trip
Yeah.
and what's actually coming up in front of them. Like this ultra chaotic Woodstock massacre type scene to kick off the scenario, and then have your main investigators come in like weeding through the mess, trying to find out what caused this, what happened, for a bit of a CSI kind of kick. Like that could be a really unique setting for a protocol that we've seen dozens of times on TV episodes, but we can explore that a lot easier within RPGs.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about Vietnam a little too, because like the obvious answer is like, oh, you can have the PCs be soldiers, but I think it'd be so much more interesting if you were like war correspondents. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, that was good. I like that you said
what are
that.
you?
Yeah.
You're taking videos of this war and reporting on it because it's like a social duty. So you open up the possibility of like the U.S. soldiers being on the bad side.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
like
very
you're
true.
being
Yeah.
told what to film, and especially being a film crew for the AP or whatnot that is obligated to follow and get all of this footage down, and then seeing something that you really were not supposed to. There is a lot to deliver in there, much more than just the Call of Duty soldier thing. And for the love of God, do not ever bring in Cho-Cho.
No,
Not for Vietnam.
not
Not
good.
ever. Just
That's
let it
weird,
die.
yeah.
Let it go.
Yeah. So you kind of going back to the hippie thing, you've got the counterculture movement in general is really coming up now. And the cult leaders are no longer like creepy, weird, like who falls
Well.
like they're charismatic. They're people that like
Right.
draw others to them. You have again like Manson and things like that. And it's not people just chanting in robes and things like that. So you have a lot of possibilities. You could bring in runaways were pretty big around this time as well. You know, people like, oh, I'm eschewing the American norms. So you can have a scenario where you have runaway teens that get pulled into some, you know, strange cult of, you know, Shub-Niggurath or something like that, that they're all worshiping this, you know, weird nature-y cult going on.
I think that there is a ton of room for that because, you know, we talked about the 50s being this hyper-rigid conformist type era, at least in, you know, pop culture media. And then the 60s was really a pendulum swing backward in terms of like, this is an aggressive counterculture movement, and that there are especially a lot of disenfranchised youths who are very interested in rebelling and not being a part of that anymore. So like Holly said, that this is really a part of like there were cults and communes that were appealing. This wasn't something sinister. This was, no, the world can be different. The world can be better. We are going to try and build this better world together. Just come with us out into the forest in Minnesota or wherever, and then it'll be fine.
Don't do it.
And you can have lots of teenage runaways, and that it can start where like a lot of these cults and communes were innocent and innocuous, and others not so much at all. And there can be a way to obscure a lot of potential horror goings on underneath the surface. I think that there's a movie called The Endless, if I remember right, fairly modern movie that dealt with communes in that way, that like ostensibly their interests were mundane. It just led to a bunch of bad things happening in the background.
And that's interesting too, because then you get the bit of leaving the community that you've grown up with or believe the same things as, which is a different kind of consequence for investigators to run into. That's not injury or death. Exclusion is pretty terrifying.
Yeah. And also in the same vein, like Holly mentioned with Woodstock earlier, like I think that there is a lot for especially nature hippie themed communes, like getting busy with old shubs, but you can also have a lot of drug trips and getting that Cthulhu dreaming, like getting a lot of communications and things by reaching into all of this LSD and weed trips and whatnot, that there's a lot of room in there as well.
So when your guy's going on about the man from Mars, he's speaking in my brain, it might actually, that might be true.
Great Poseidon, guide me.
It might be Pluto, so they're off a little bit.
Well, I think with that, we can bop on over to the 1970s. And this is where I will get on my soapbox and proclaim that, first of all, I love space horror. And second of all, modern, like space horror set in modern or recently modern times is underutilized horror in general.
Preach it.
Yes. So we have the moon landings that are in the Apollo 11 and 12 are at the end of 1969, and then the remaining Apollo missions are in the early 70s, with the exception of Apollo 13 that doesn't make it to the moon. But even that itself is horror. If you think about, you know, your three people in a little tiny tin can being put on a bunch of explosives and thrown into the atmosphere, and the only people that can help you are like 20 people that are on the ground hundreds of miles away.
What was that quote that you gave? Is all I can think about is that this was built by the lowest bidder.
That's what John Glenn said when they asked him. They're like, how would it feel? What were you thinking when you were orbiting the Earth? And he was like, I was only thinking that I was writing something that was built by the lowest bidder.
I would love to see a scenario where it's like you can have PCs on the ground in ground control, and then also have PCs up in that little shuttle. It would be actually really entertaining if everyone's playing as ground control, but as soon as they mess up, we switch over the people
jump to the
astronauts.
Yeah. There's an out of print scenario called Grace Under Pressure that takes place in a submarine and does the similar thing where it's like two GMs, you split the group, you physically separate them and give them like radios. And that's the only way they can even talk to each other. To do something like that would be, I think, interesting and effective because, you know, we do have the radio comms with folks and going to the moon landing. So if you make it to the moon, I like the idea of, you know, Apollo 12, Apollo 14, 15, 16 gets to the moon and they're checking it out and they find the bodies of the astronauts who were there on Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz. And then it's like, what came home, who came home, because
Yeah, who's in mission
they
control?
came home. Yeah, who's sitting in mission control right now talking to these people?
Yeah.
I like that idea.
I think particularly with these more historical settings, there is a lot of room to, if you're playing in a certain era, to capitalize on something that was taken for granted to have happened in the past. So, if the I'm trying to think of other examples here, but the 70s, I'm reading Witchcraft for Wayward Girls right now, and they characterized one year was that was the year the Beatles broke up. And so, but recalling these past events that people have taken for granted and then finding out that something was wrong with it. I also kind of to our World War II, like with Hellboy, I always loved that in 1954 when Hitler died in 45. Did he now?
Yeah. I like the historical twist on things.
Yeah.
I do like that a lot.
I mean,
yeah.
we just skipped the Kennedy one, Kennedy's
we did gloss over the
assassination
Kennedy
is.
assassination, yeah.
This would be the first time to put in a conspiracy theory, but what if he was an alien?
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk on that. Yeah, my point is, it is exciting and, interesting to set space horror in, far sci-fi where we have all these advances in technology, but, there is some super real horror in the fact that, we were just doing our best 50, 60 years ago to send people to the moon, and it was not always, low technology can be pretty scary.
And even one little mistake and you're hosed. That's it. You don't need to roll for hit points. That's it.
Yeah. So keeping along with the 70s, we also have disco. We have I know, who likes that? Sitcoms are kind of on the rise as well. And I like I feel like there's something there with sitcoms. Like you mentioned the whole Leave It to Beaver thing, but I feel like there's something to be said for a scenario within sitcoms set in a sitcom set on the set of a sitcom.
Oh, yeah.
Or a scenario where the players don't know that they are in a sitcom.
Oh, they don't know
but
you're in
the
a
characters
Truman
themselves
Show.
gain awareness.
Yeah.
There's a Grant Howitt game that just came out where you're on a sitcom with a horse, and you're not to acknowledge that it is a horse, but it's just a horse. It's not a trained horse. So the horror is that this horse will just start hurting people if it gets scared. And there is that little bit of we talked about with 1950s. Everyone's trying to just be chill. Everybody
cool.
just calm down. We know there's the horse in the room. But we can't acknowledge it because it'll kick me in the face and kill me. So there might be something with sitcoms
That's
there.
very Grant
You
Howitt.
could definitely have some kind of recursive scenario in a sitcom.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day it's a new day. And also, I'd like to point out that Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was in the 70s. And if that is not a body horror movie or the potential for a body horror movie, I don't know what is, because, they're killing the children and turning them into chocolate.
I think something else, too, in terms of vibes that are important to keep in mind for these decades, in addition to reviewing past media and other things in there, is, Holly, you ran into a little bit of trouble in differentiating the 60s and 70s,
in
right?
my mind, as a person who didn't live through either decade, they kind of blurred together a little bit to me.
Right. And I agree. And reading through it, I was just like, oh, I thought that was the 60s. Okay. Or even I made that error with Sputnik earlier. And so I think that it can be really important for your players, at least, to really hammer in on key vibes. I think whenever we think of 60s, we think of that hard counterculture. Everyone has ideas of hippies. You can run with that. Go. The 70s, though the main events may have been a bit different, to me, it really elicits a lot more it was more rock and roll. Kiss was more of a thing. The cars were heavy, all steel type ordeals. It was a little grungier, a little more mechanical in terms of that, trying to progress into something almost modern, but it's still a bit behind the times.
Well, and also this is an interesting time too. You have people are protesting. You have
we didn't even
Kent
talk
State,
about Nixon and Kent State and all of that too.
There's a lot of anger that's starting to build at this point,
and a lot of paranoia. That's again harping on Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. Is I think that Hendricks does a good job of illustrating that people are given or fed narratives across the TV that oh yeah, those college students they're rioting up so bad they have to call in the National Guard to protect people, and then getting this false information spoon fed to them and being told a narrative that we as as players know is not true, but that our characters may have to have that weird suspension of disbelief in there. And like we mentioned with World War II before, despots will do anything to keep clinging to power. So boom, Nixon is trying to make deals with Migo or something to try and get a head in a jar. I feel like I've seen that in a TV show somewhere.
I kind of want him to be hanging out with deep ones, if I'm honest. This is my new running mate.
It's just you get the but bubbles coming up.
All right, speaking of bubbles, let's jump into the 80s.
Boy, that's a segue.
Oh, man. God, I'm like a pro at this. So good. The Titanic was actually found in 85, and that's a setting that's not used. We talked a little bit about subs, but going down into finding the Titanic and finding, oh, it's not split in two at all. There's
I love that.
perfectly
Not
correct.
damaged at all.
Yeah.
It's just sitting there.
oh, that's
found
weird. There's
wrong.
still people moving around on it. That's
Nice.
That's weird. I mean, you might have to fudge history a little bit because I don't know how you'd get out of the submersible exactly. Maybe there's some technology
They have
there.
suits. That's it. That's all you need.
Yeah,
Like,
you know.
You
You
get
there's
in
always
the helmets
hand
with
wave
the
it.
tubes.
Yeah, there's
We
always
have a
a bit
whole
of leeway.
episode on verisimilitude versus pulp.
Yeah.
You know, you can, it doesn't all have to be.
It's a man
historically
submersible
accurate.
with suits. That's it. That's all you need. Just go. They're connected to the submersible, so you can't go too far. Wait, did something tug on that?
And a harpoon gun. Harpoon gun is a necessity for underwater. If I'm playing a scenario and I don't see that, I'm leaving. I'm standing up and leaving.
It has happened before, actually.
Yeah. Other disasters. I guess the Titanic.
Title of my
Finding it's not the disaster. Whatever. Chernobyl's there. I don't know if anybody's ever thought of that as an inspiration for, I don't know, a video game series or anything that really stocks things. But yeah, roadside picnic type things of just anomalous zones, things mutating. I mean, I like body horror. That's creepy.
You could have things of the mythos attracted to this,
Oh,
like
yeah.
radioactive
Yeah.
waste.
I always
Yeah,
think of
yeah,
like Azathoth or something that feeds on that radiation,
Yep.
that maybe certain regions around Chernobyl are now clear and people are trying to move and settle in. But like, why is the radiation getting sapped from just these areas?
It'd be easy for like other races to be like, well, let's put in the brain dog there and just test it out, see if they notice it. Because people will look at it and be like, well, that's an alien, obviously. No, wait, it's Chernobyl. Yeah. Must
Or there
just
was
be
a
that
thing
way.
I saw online the other day that there is some new black mold that is feeding on the radiation
Yeah.
in the Chernobyl sites.
Yeah.
Like, there, you got the writing done for you.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, and I mean, just Chernobyl too there's the elephant foot, right? Where if you see that, that's
Oh, I thought
too late.
I thought you literally meant Chernobyl
Terrible
2.
Note Part 2. That's what I
Chernobyl
thought.
Part
too.
It gets worse.
This time it's bigger.
Why did we build right next to the old one? Speaking of disasters, I'm like Spider-Man up here. The Exxon Valdez is 1989. I assume that deep ones are not super happy about oil being thrown all over their place, but who knows? Maybe they love
Maybe they're
it.
delighted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
driving around their cars. They're like, finally, someone's
Thank
thinking
God.
of us.
That would be a lot of great chaos, especially for like a convention scenario where
Yeah.
you're playing the people on the rig in the ocean. Everything is blowing up, and then
On fire.
deep ones
Deep
are
ones
climbing
start
up the
come up,
pipes to
yeah.
whip your ass for like littering in their yard. That, oh my God, that would be fun.
Well, you could also be the people that are like soaping down the birds on the shore.
Oh, no.
I work for Dawn. I'm cleaning
Yeah,
up all the ducks.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah, and then there's a fish man there that's next in line. He raises his hand. Me, please.
You know, we say this all the time, but for a system called Call of Cthulhu, the big guy doesn't make enough appearances, and I feel like
Yeah.
this is his moment, his time to shine.
Yeah, and I mean the 80s too. You've got the Satanic Panic, so people are. Yeah, I know that's a
Yes.
big. Holly likes that. Call of Cthulhu is a good one if you want to bring in the demonic.
I think because we can also, I think that there's a lot of room to poke fun at maybe your characters are, they're teenagers who are playing a game where they're going into dungeons and fighting trolls, and that you can have that satanic panic around this made-up D&D-esque fantasy game, and then get a little meta with it and sort of play with that some more in terms of the satanic panic is, oh no, this is evil, this is bad, you should play this, and then that's your little, like, you should read this play called The King in Yellow, or something like that. I think that there's room for fun to play with.
Yeah.
I mean, any chick track from that era,
my
you
God.
could just transition to a scenario. Oh, Blackleaf, no.
I like the idea of flipping the narrative, because I know that at this time there's also a lot of like, brainwashing, backtracking in songs, and like they're brainwashing the
That's
children.
such a good one for the
Yeah.
70s too. Like
Yes.
the 70s was all about like Kiss and Pink Floyd. You have to spin the
You
record
play it backwards,
Yeah.
But I like the idea of playing on that and playing up that, or even like the reverse of it, like they're brainwashing the parents. And like the parents are like, now we must destroy all of these, like it.
Nice.
I like the idea of either side of that coin a little bit.
Yeah, D&D shows too much. We got to get rid of it.
And only the kids can stop it. So that's
Yeah.
classic
It's
archetype.
all a conspiracy because the entries for gelatinous cubes are too close to actual Shoggoths. And so the Shoggoths are like, no, we can't let them
Take
know
that
about
out,
the
take that
acid
out, take that
damage.
out.
The lightning weakness? No. It's also the decade of VHS, kind of rising in popularity.
Hell yeah.
Analog horror. E.T. is disgusting and, is basically a scenario there of he touches you with his weird little finger and things happen.
Yeah,
I don't
honestly,
know.
I think we could spend an entire second panel just talking about analog horror. There's so
Yeah,
much potential
analog
with that
horror is so
physical
good.
media, cursed videotapes, VHS rental stores. You're the one host of an FM radio station that's kind of the only point of contact for an entire town. Wasn't it Killer Frequency as a recent Steam game that was a lot of fun, kind of tapping on that? No, I love analog horror, and I think 80s, that's the time of synthwave and neon and god-awful patterns and bowling alleys. There's so much to explore in there, and I think you're hitting into that recency bias where, like with Stranger Things, that kicked off a lot of 80s retro fads and whatnot, and then you can play that up or bring in something different. I know there's someone in this room I'm definitely not staring at right now who made a terrific scenario that was set in the 80s and did a lot of great stuff with analog horror, Colin Richards. Oh, sorry, what?
You could also experiment with like public access, so like anyone can have a show.
Yeah,
Anyone.
that's true. Yeah, anyone can have a show.
It's kind of like anybody can have a pod in the 90s.
Anyways, no,
in the 90s, running into that, the Hubble telescope. What did they see? What did they find?
What's looking back?
Yeah, exactly. Who's knocking on it? Yep. The end of the Cold War is now, so that's a long war. Like I could see each decade having its own.
Yeah, I think there's something to say for a campaign that kind of spans. Yeah,
because then you've
that'd
got
be
the
good.
fall of the Berlin Wall, which is fun. Not fun at the time. Well, fun at the time, I guess. It's good. But yeah, there's definitely room for that. Very. What is that? I can't think of the movie now where Tilda Swinton plays two roles. She's an old man. That's the
There
one,
you go.
Suspiria. Yeah, that's a really good, creepy idea for Call of Cthulhu of witches and ballet.
Unfortunately, as you were talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall, all my mind could think about was just Attack on Titan, Attack on Titan, Attack on Titan. There's people in the walls.
I guess you could do Attack on Titan as well. Middle of the 90s, you had Dolly the sheep. Cloning's creepy. Having a lot of something is creepy.
Yeah, especially if you have like maybe they pulled a Jurassic Park and Dolly the sheep was cloned with just a little bit of material from old shubs that they
Yep.
happened to find that was very good at replicating. And so then Dolly buds into another Dolly and another and another. And you get this almost kind of blob type thing that's just a mass of flesh going around.
And then you decide you got to just like nip it in the bud and kill Dolly, but then like the bits of Dolly just bud into more Dollies.
There is a scenario that's kind of similar to that premise. If you wanted additional ideas, it's called Flesh Wounds. It was a lot of fun. I do recommend it for a one shot.
You can
But
say
that's set in the 20s and 30s, so I'm not going to mention it again.
And who's to say that cloning is not just for sheep at that
Yeah.
in the scenario, if you're talking scenarios,
Well, and you can play with things like let's say you let an investigator get cloned, but instead of being a separate thing, they're sharing senses, and that's driving them insane. You don't really get a copy. You are just that again. Also, I have to say that scenario should be named Hello, Dolly.
No, boo.
Beyond that, grunge music, television taking off even more. Like, think the O.J. Simpson car chase, like Paparazzi, Nightcrawler, the movie with
Oh, God.
Jake
It's horrible.
Gyllenhaal, having the investigators be real creeps trying to find accidents is a good hook, I think.
Yeah, I like it.
I think in that vein of 90s TV, this is my complete bias as a millennial, but I think that the 80s walked so that the 90s could run in terms of peak cartoon programming. Every Saturday morning cartoon, you had Johnny Bravo, Courage the Cowardly Dog. You had all of these great media, Powerpuff Girls and Power Rangers, Pokemon. Like, that was a great time to be a kid. I'm totally biased. But that there is so much in terms of nostalgia you can also capitalize on in there, like having some kind of wacky Power Rangers scenario for a convention. Like, yes, please sign me up.
That's a good way to make your players have to stick together, too. They can't summon the Megazord if somebody's off in a corner reading a diary.
I would simply summon the Megazord at the beginning of the scenario.
Honestly, that's the strategy they should use every time, and it does bug me.
I think that would be a great scenario where everyone suffers a bout of madness at the start of the scenario, and like they are the Power Rangers.
Yeah.
All right, and to kind of do the transition, I think Y2K, Lex, that's straddling the line between our decades of the 90s were the terror leading up to it, and then
the 2000s just went shit wild with it. But like, it's Y2K was just such a fascinating period to live through because the entire world was just gripped by this conspiracy theory that the Y2K virus was going to shut down every computer in operation at the time. Planes would fall out of the sky and chaos would ensue. I vividly remember being a kid and going through Best Buy, and they had little reminders to unplug your new computer on New Year's Eve, 1999. There's a lot that you can play into in terms of conspiracy theories and things around Y2K. In the collection Cold, Black, and Infinite, Todd Kiesling has a really fun short story around Y2K involving the King in Yellow, where the criminal is being interviewed that he believes he stopped the Y2K virus, but he actually just did something to permit a propagation of the King in Yellow, that like playing with that sense of reality and right and wrong in terms of that. I think that there's a lot of room in there.
It's also interesting, too, because Y2K is one of those disasters. I mean, obviously, it went okay, I guess.
It was just an aster. There wasn't any diss to it.
But it's one that people could see coming and prepare for. So you've got this weird, like, people are terrified, but I distinctly remember also having Y2K merch.
Oh, yeah.
Of like, oh, here's my little beanie baby of the Y2K bug.
They wrote kids' books. Did anyone here read Y2K9 whenever they were in elementary school or anything? Like, people wrote books about it. Like, it was such a surreal time with this conspiracy theory and disaster that, like, everyone kind of thought was bunk, but then maybe it's not.
It could happen.
So they put tinfoil on their windows just in case. And, like, this was truly... Sorry, I'm going to get ahead of myself because the 2000s was such an interesting time for the rapid proliferation of conspiracy theories, unlike any time before it. The 90s was when computers and the internet were kind of starting to be around, but I consider the 2000s to be, that's when the internet really got its dial-up legs underneath it, and that people could access it from their home computers, and you primarily just went to random websites. Like, the internet was new and open and free in a way very different than a hyper-commercialized now. And that you could find anything from like salad fingers and Charlie the Unicorn to watching a journalist get beheaded during your school's computer lab. Like, I was in, I think, middle school with that. Like, it was just crazy.
Yeah, and so just to get into the like scenario stuff, I vividly remember playing in a game that you ran, Lex, in which one of my fellow investigators decided in his ignorance, because he's looking at this symbol and he's like, I don't know what this is. Let me put it on the internet and ask
people.
everyone Does anyone know what this is? This yellow sign?
Have you seen it?
Have you seen it? Do you know
Have
what
you
this
seen this?
is?
Can you tell me what this is? Like, it's great. And also, like, kind of, I mentioned Todd Kiesling just a second ago. There's a chance to cross-pollinate with the internet in this here because he has a novella, Scanlines. I think is a really cool read where it takes the cursed videotape kind of archetype, and there was a cursed videotape that will haunt anyone who watches it into dying, basically. And someone had apparently ripped it and uploaded it to Napster with a porn-like title.
Oh, God.
And so the whole story kicks off with a group of high school boys are crowded around their friend's computer trying to download porn off LimeWire, and they accidentally watch this footage. And so, like, it's a great way to have that analog horror, but delivering that kind of 2000s setting.
Yeah.
It felt very nostalgic and unique in a way that you can only get at that period.
Like, you could also have entire manuscripts from the Necronomicon uploaded.
Oh, yeah.
on the
Yeah,
internet.
on people's random blogs.
Yeah.
That's
I would encourage everyone because I think there is a common train of thought among those of us who GM games that like giving players access to technology like gives them the shortcut to the end of the scenario. And it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do modern scenarios because smartphones and the internet, and it's too easy, and it kind of takes away the investigative element. But, you know, embrace the technology as horror and like the dissemination of like horrific things online that can be easily accessed, you know?
Like, we also saw this mirrored in terms of movie releases at the time, too. Like, anyone ever watched Pulse and Fear.com? That is totally how the internet worked at the time. But it's still, it's harping on that the internet is something new and super exciting and promising, but it's truly the Wild West, and we don't know what we're going to wander into until we are there. So lots of ways that you can capitalize on that, because generally, in the 2000s, that you're dealing with technology that is computers that are hardwired for dial-up, lots of portable, smaller devices. But we're dealing with flip phones and those bulletproof Nokia 5330s, I think. I think even though iTouches and smartphones were starting to come out in the 2000s, I would reserve that for a more modern setting to try and distill those unique vibes that you can text a friend. It's going to cost you 25 cents per message.
Boy.
So you don't want to text much, and you have 256 characters. Go.
Summoned, bad, trouble, in.
Honestly, I was running a scenario set in the 90s, and I completely forgot how beepers worked. Like, I thought that there were letters on there, but I didn't know how to get the letters, so I just used it as this jank-ass texting. So they would constantly, like, get payphones and call, and they could get, like, 4 characters. And so it was, like, PLZHLP, and it was all that they could get, but no other context.
You
Also,
could do that with collect calls too, right? This is a collect
Call
call from.
from-
I opened the Necronomicon. I'm in a lot of trouble. Please help. Would you like to accept?
But also, in terms of distilling these unique vibes, like, obviously I'm spending more time here on the 2000s because it's something I think all of us here, I don't see anyone like that tall, all of us here can recall the 2000s and be able to deliver those unique vibes. But that doesn't mean that you can't apply previous scenarios to it, because I mean, there's no GPS at this point yet, really. It's MapQuest, baby. And if those directions ever get deviated from because of construction, you got to pull out that big highway map and like magnifying glass to figure out where you're at. So there's tons of room for still getting lost on the road and wandering into a Dead Light style scenario or something. But it's just about getting those vibes that I think can really refresh a lot of scenarios from that 20s and 30s setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very like local 57 TV, the YouTube channel. That there, you have reached your final destination is a great video about GPS taking you down some weird places.
Yeah, and it's more of using that technology that we're still familiar with today because it's pretty similar, and that's creepier because you kind of feel it, you know, you have it.
Yeah. And also in terms of familiar too, we're seeing a resurgence in popularity because of vintage throwbacks. Oh my God, I just turned into dust a little bit. But the 2000s is whenever pop music and boy bands totally had a chokehold on the public consensus. And this is when like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were it. And I think that there's a lot of fun scenarios you can really pull in with that.
Yeah, it's like
too.
subliminal, again, the subliminal messaging or things like that. I like that idea.
Or like your paparazzi having to
Yeah.
follow the boy bands around and then seeing something weird happening.
Yep.
Also, like in the 2000s, this is when reality TV really started taking off. And like you had, instead of game shows like Price is Right, you had Survivor for the first time, American Idol for the first time. Please, someone give me a Survivor-focused scenario. Like, that is such a fun vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found this abandoned island. Go check it out and
Oh, God.
live there for a
Now,
month.
we're going to see if you can survive on it for 5 days and 5 nights. Don't worry about those things in the water.
We're just keeping production costs down. That's the key, is you're just bringing them down.
Also, sort of, it reminds me of the Satanic Panic, because this was the time when Harry Potter was
Yeah.
absolutely
Oh, yeah,
taking
yeah,
off
yeah,
in
yeah,
things. And at least someone from a very conservative Christian rural background, that people would say, it's teaching witchcraft. And like, you could not have it. I remember Pokemon cards was how the devil would get you too. And so like playing into those kind of fun things too. So maybe there's I don't know, I'm trying to think like a
Exodia.
Photogramon or something
Yeah.
that you can have. You're playing the cards and the names of the different cards can be bits of a summoning
Yeah.
thing
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
like, I don't know, there's fun, wacky stuff you can bring in there too.
I play Deep One in defense mode.
I think that's it from me. I've been
Yeah.
talking a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think we could turn it over to our audience if anyone has any questions or thoughts that they want to share.
Brilliant ideas we can steal.
Sure.
Yeah,
And all
please,
of this
yeah.
genius that we have been shining down. But do folks have any ideas for different sorts of scenario inspiration across these decades that, like, we obviously are really biased towards the 80s to 2000s because we lived it, and we were having to work off of, like, online resources and things for the previous decade. So especially like other stuff in there, love to hear people's ideas.
Well, one thing, you guys, the Jim Jones massacre is one that.
Yes, I
Oh,
skipped
Jim
over the
Jones,
Jim
yeah.
Jones
But also
massacre in the
Mount St.
70s.
Helens in the 80s.
Oh, Mount St.
Oh,
Helens
that's
a
right.
great
Yes,
one.
Mount
Yeah.
St. Helens. And then like the Heaven's Gate in the 90s too. We were talking about like cults and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, very good point.
I was thinking about, I actually started writing a kind of a multi-era one based on the toys of the era. Like you start off with like the 60s,
Oh,
you have
fun.
the yard darts. And then you go into the 80s, the Cabbage Patch. And then the 90s, you have Furbies. Furbies are like the ultimate evil.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's that. Okay, that's it. You just say Furbies, and then that's the terror. Roll sand.
So for our podcast later, because I don't know how well we'll pick it up, but toys throughout the ages is the idea there.
Yeah, that's great. Great idea.
Yeah, great.
They're connected. It's not just single. They're actually, it's like the same toy company under different names going and doing it. That was my idea.
Oh, that would be such a fun mystery to dive into.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that.
Why does Hasbro keep releasing these evil toys?
I may have to bleep that out in post. I don't know if we can say that.
This isn't D&D.
Up front and then you back there.
Yeah, I was just saying you could get the Survivor premise, but flip it so you're the camera crew.
Oh yeah.
The
Camera
survivors
crew of the
get
Survivor.
like body swapped or something, but you can't interact with them.
I like it.
That'd break your contract.
Oh no.
So the Yith come in, they swap in, and you just see the person lying in the sand making sand angels, and it's like, well, they're acting weird, but
But this is great TV.
Keep rolling.
And then back in
So you
second.
mentioned the bomb shelter. I kind of abandoned an idea. I was brainstorming on that. The 1950s, a bunch of teenagers go into their parents' bomb shelter to party because their parents.
Like
Hell
you do.
yeah. Yes.
party in a bomb shelter.
Partying
nice.
in a bomb shelter.
Part of a vast subterranean complex under the town.
What?
Yeah.
Cultists, and that's where their parents are out for the evening.
I like that.
How
Yeah, I
about
like that a
the
lot.
new ghoul warrens are bomb shelters that are
Oh
connected.
yeah, nice.
Yeah. I like it.
Or mole people. I don't know. Why haven't we seen more mole people?
Be the change you want to see in the world.
A couple years ago, Frank Russell from MU Skulls, who's running games here, we were talking about musical festivals when I walked in. He did a gathering of the Juggalos.
Gathering of the Juggalos. I love it.
In all of his games, he has a video screen that's facing the players, and he always puts in clips, music, pictures of everything you see.
That's
so
fun.
he downloaded a bunch of pictures from the gathering, and literally we had 20 or 30 people that would walk by and go, "What are you playing?" And they would stop. So we had 8 players, but there was 20 people behind them just waiting to see what was going to pop up next. And they all had laced Fago, and there was a underground chamber where they were summoning, something. It was a hoop.
That's
and
really
that is
fun.
such a powerful tool that you can just like print out pictures.
Yeah, for sure.
To get them into the game.
Every game that he
Right.
runs, he gets on and he puts together a PowerPoint. So every character, every location, every sound effect, everything he has on a PowerPoint, and as the group encounters it, you see it in front of you.
Nice.
He has a handout, so he's got hundreds of these.
Yeah, it's really handy with the current stuff that you can get good photos and other media that you might not be able to get as easily from the 40s or 50s. Trying to find old records is impossible.
Well, I'd love to keep this going all day, but unfortunately, it looks like we've gone a little bit over our allotted time. Thank you all for coming to listen to our chattering skulls. If you would like to hear more of these noises for some reason, you can listen to our disembodied voices on our RPG Reanimators podcast. You can find it on most streaming platforms, YouTube. You can find us.
Discord.
Yeah, you can find us on Discord, Blue Sky, all the social medias. It's been a blast being up here. We hope you've had a good time, and I look forward to seeing any new scenarios y'all can come up with this.
Yeah, thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Hope you all enjoy the con.
Come get free stickers.
Free stickers, but before we go too much, I did promise I'd take a picture of us and the thing, so stay put.
Come get free stickers and free business cards if you like.
They work great as throwing stars.
This is not my beautiful wife.
Yeah, exactly.